Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell, Chapter 19. Another summer had come, and still I had not speared the giant devilfish that lived near the cave. Every day during the spring, Rontu and I went to look for him. I would put the canoe in the water and paddle slowly through the cave, from one opening to the other, often several times. I saw many devilfish there where the black water was streaked with light, but not the giant one. At last I gave up looking for him and began to gather abalones for winter. The red shells hold the sweetest meat and were the best for drying, though the green ones and the black ones were also good. Because the red ones were the sweetest, starfish preyed upon them. This star-shaped creature places itself over the shell of an abalone. With its 5 arms spread out against the rock to which the abalone is fastened, it holds the shell with its suckers and then begins to lift itself. The starfish pulls against the abalone shell, sometimes for days, holding on it with its suckers, pushing up with its legs, little by little, lifting its heavy shell comes loose from the body. One morning we left the cave and paddled out to the reef, which is joined to it. For many days I had been gathering a few shellfish on the rocks at Coral Cove, but I had been watching the reef and waiting for the right time to harvest. This is when there are few starfish feeding, for they are as hard to pry loose from the abalone as the abalone is to pry from the rock. The tide was low and the reef rose far out of the water. Along its sides were great numbers of red abalones and very few starfish. So before the sun was high, I filled the bottom of the canoe. The day was windless, and since I had all that I could carry, I tied the canoe, and with Rontu following me, we climbed up into the reef to look for fish to spear for our supper. Blue dolphins were leaping beyond the kelp beds. In the kelp, otter were playing the games that they never tire of. All around me, everywhere, the gulls were fishing for scallops, which were numerous that summer. They grow on the floating kelp leaves, where there are so many of them that much of the kelp near the reef had been dragged to the bottom. Still, there were scallops that the gulls could reach, and taking them in their beaks, they would fly far above the reef and let them drop. The gulls would then swoop down to the rocks and pick the meat from the broken shells. Scallops fell on the reef like rain, which amused me, but not Rontu, who could not understand what the gulls were doing. Dodging this way and that, I went to the end of the reef where the biggest fish live. With a sinew line and a hook that I made out of abalone shell, I caught 2 that had large heads and long teeth, but were good to eat. I gave one to Rontu, and on the way back to the canoe gathered the purple sea urchins used for dyeing. Rontu, who was trotting along in front of me, suddenly dropped his fish and stood looking down over the edge of the reef. There, swimming in the clear water, was a devilfish. It was the same one I had been hunting for. It was the giant. Seldom do you see any devilfish here, for they like deep places, and the water along this part of the reef was shallow. Perhaps this one lived in a cave and came here only when he could not find food. Rontu made no sound. I fixed the head of the spear and the long string that held it to my wrist. I then crawled back to the edge of the reef. The giant had not moved. He was floating just below the surface of the water, and I could plainly see his eyes. They were the size of small stones and stood out from his head with black rims and gold centers in the center of black spot, like the eye of a spirit I had once seen on the night that rain fell and lightning forked in the sky. Where my hands rested was a deep crevice, and in it a fish was hiding. The giant was half the length of my spear from the reef, but while I watched, one of his long arms ran out like a snake and felt its way into the crevice. It went past the fish and along the side of the rock, and then at the end of it, it curled back. As the arm gently wound itself around the fish from behind, I rose to one knee and drove my spear. I aimed at the giant's head, but though it was larger than my 2 fishes and a good target, I missed. The spear struck down through the water and slanted off. Instantly, a black cloud surrounded the devilfish. The only thing I could see of him was one arm long, still grasping its prey. I jumped to my feet and pulled at the spear, thinking that I might have a chance to throw it again. But as I did so, the shaft bobbed back to the surface, and I saw that the barbed point had come loose. At the same moment, the string tightened. My grip on it broke, and, aware that I had struck the devilfish, I quickly dropped the coils that I held, for when the string runs out fast, it burns your arms or hands and becomes entangled. The devilfish does not swim with fins or flippers like other things in the sea. He takes water in through a hole in the front of his body and pushes the water out behind him in two slits. When he is swimming slowly, you can see these two strings tailing out, but only then. When he moves fast, you can see nothing except the streak in the water. The coils had dropped under the rock, hopped and sang as they ran. There was no more of them. The string tightened on my wrist and then lessened the shock. I leaped across the crevice to the direction that the giant had taken. With the string in both hands, but still fastened to my wrist, I braced my feet on the slippery rock and leaned backwards. The string snapped tight with the weight of the devilfish. It began to stretch, and fearing that it might break, I walked forward. Yet I made him pull me every step. He was moving towards the cave, along the edge of the reef. The cave was a good distance away, but if he got there, I would surely lose him. The canoe was tied just in front of me. Once I was in it, I could let him pull him until he grew tired, but there was no way to untie the canoe and still hold on to the string. Rontu, all this time, was running up and down the reef, barking and leaping at me, which made my task harder. Step by step, I walked forward until the devilfish was in the deep water close to the cave. He was so close that I had to stop. Even if the sinew broke, I lost him. Therefore, I braced myself and did not move. The sinew stretched, throwing off drops of water. I could hear it stretch, and I was sure it would break. But it did not. I did not feel it cutting into my hands, though they bled. The pull suddenly lessened, and I was sure he was gone. But the next instant, I saw the string cutting the water in a wide circle. He was swimming off from the cave and the reef toward some rocks that were about twice the length of the string away. He would be safe there too, for among them were many places to hide. I pulled half the string while he was moving towards a rock, but soon had to let it out. It grew tired and again began to stretch. It grew tight and again began to stretch. The water here was only a little over my waist, and I let myself down over the reef. There was a sandbar not far from the rocks, and I stepped carefully to the bottom, which was full of holes. I slowly made my way towards it. Rontu swam along by my side. I reached the sandbar before the devilfish could hide himself in the rocks. The string held, and he turned about and once more swam towards the cave. Twice again he did this. Each time I took off in some of the string. The third time, as he came up into the shallow water, I walked backward across the sandbar so he would not see me and pulled the string with all my strength. The giant slid up under the sand. He lay there with his arms spread out, partly out of the water, and I thought he was dead. Then I saw his eyes moving. Before I could shout a warning, Rontu had rushed forward to seize him, but the devilfish was too heavy to lift or shake. As Rontu's jaws sought another hold, 3 of the many arms wound itself around his neck. Devilfish are only dangerous in the water, where they can fasten themselves to you with their long arms. These arms have rows of suckers beneath them, and they can drag you under and hold you there until you drown. But even on the land, the devilfish can injure you, for he is strong and does not die quickly. The giant was flailing his arms, struggling to get back into the water. Little by little, he was dragging Rontu with him. I could no longer use a string because it was wound around Rontu's leg. The whalebone knife I used for prying abalones from the rocks was tied to the belt around my waist. The blade was thick at the point, but had a very sharp edge. I dropped the coils of string and unfastened the knife as I ran. I ran past the devilfish and got between him and the deep water. So many of his arms were flailing that it was useless to cut any of them. One struck me on the leg, and it burned like a whip. Another, which Rontu had chewed off, lay writhing at the edge of the water, as if it were looking for something to fasten onto. The head rose out of the twisting arms like a giant stalk. The gold eyes with the black rims were fixed on me. Above the sound of the waves, the water rushing and Rontu's barking, I could hear the snapping of his beak, which was sharper than a knife I held in my hand. I drove the knife down into his body, and as I did this, I was suddenly covered, or so it seemed, with a countless number of leeches suckering to my skin. Fortunately, one hand was free, the hand that held the knife, and again I struck through the tough hide. The suckers, which were fastened to me and pained greatly, lessened their hold. Slowly the arms stopped moving and then grew limp. I tried to drag the devilfish out of the water, but my strength was gone. It did not even go back to the reef for my canoe, though I did take the shaft and the head of the spear, which had cost me much labor, and the sinew line. It was night before Rontu and I got back to the house. Rontu had a gash on his nose from the giant's beak, and I had many cuts and bruises. I saw 2 more giant devilfish along the reef that summer, but I did not try to spear them.